Good morning, everyone. We're about to begin our webinar. Thank you all for joining this morning or afternoon. This is webinar 5, Getting Great Customer Feedback Early and Advice for Foreign Startups. We are very pleased today to welcome Andrew Ackerman from DreamIt Ventures in New York. He is Managing Director at DreamIt. This is a New York City-based EdTech accelerator program that helps startups gain customers and scale rapidly. Andrew has been Managing Director of DreamIt Ventures since February 2014. He is a recovering consultant turned serial entrepreneur, startup mentor, and angel investor. DreamIt is the only EdTech accelerator focused on post-seed stage startups. And this is a program that has partnered with some of the most innovative and tech-forward K-12 schools and universities to create unparalleled customer network where EdTech founders can validate their assumptions, build traction, and position startups. So we're very pleased to have Andrew here today. He works with startups on a daily basis, and we're very glad to welcome the conversation on gaining customer feedback early and advice for foreign startups. So Andrew, please, welcome.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if the resolution on my webcam is good enough, but I was blushing a little bit during some of that intro. I'm also going to apologize in advance. I don't know if any of you are following this, but there's a massive snowstorm hitting the northeast of the United States. So I'm doing this from my home. You can see my blinds in the background. It's a little unprofessional, but it was either that or maybe not actually making it to the office this morning. As a practical matter, I'm going to go through two somewhat related presentations that we give fairly regularly at DreamIt. One is about how to effectively get the feedback that you need before ideally launching your product. And the other is specific advice for foreign startups who are thinking about planting a flag in the United States. I have no problem taking questions along the way. But I'm going to ask you what format works best for you. Should I just go through and answer questions at the end, or should I open up the chat window on the side?
Yeah, we can filter some of the questions through the chat window, and this is what's worked in the past. And of course, any participant who would like to speak, please send us a chat, and we can go ahead and unmute your microphone. So that's how we'll operate.
Let me just size everything appropriately, so that I have a fighting chance of actually seeing the screen while I do this. Okay, let's give that a shot. Okay, let's jump right in. I've already been introduced, so I won't go any further. The only thing I will mention is that in addition to the EdTech track, which I run, we also run a digital health track as well. The deadline for that is actually this Friday, so tomorrow. So if you happen to know any really great digital health companies who have product in market, decent initial revenue, and we're interested in basically taking their product to the next level, getting to an A round, and opening up operations in the US. We're looking for them as well. So just send them to dreamit.com. And with that little commercial done, let's jump right in. What I try to do is get this thing to advance to the next page. There we go. Yep, we're going to start with meeting with customers, and this is a very actionable, very kind of tactical set of advice. So, I always start with key insights. So the key insight is that you want to meet with your customers as early as possible. And you want to have a plan going into these interactions so that you can maximize the value of these interactions. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to get nearly as much out of these these opportunities as you otherwise would. Okay, so more specifically, the way you master the customer meeting is you have to answer some key questions. So number one, when do you want to meet with them? Who do you want to meet with? Where do you want to meet with them? What do you ask exactly? And how do you manage this discussion so it's as effective for you as possible? So to answer the first question, I'm having a little trouble docking this chat window so I can actually see my own slides. Give me a minute to handle the technical difficulties. Chat window went away. Okay, number one, the answer is very simple. You talk to your customers as early as possible. Really, as soon as you have a basic positioning statement. So Question number one I often get is, wait, don't I need a prototype before I can take it to the customers? And the answer is usually no. You often don't even need a real mock-up. You really just need, starting off with what you're going to do, very crisp definition of what your pain points are and how you're going to solve them. If you have a clickable wireframe or some mock-ups, that's nice. In some cases that can help your customer visualize exactly what you think your solution is, but it's not always necessary. Next question is, where do you meet with them? Who do you meet with? And that's actually a more subtle point than you might imagine. So for many enterprise startups, and especially in the edtech space, there are almost 3 different types of customers, or at least 3 different hacks you have to think about. So number one, who benefits from this service, right? The benefit might be the student, might be the teacher, it might be the administrator, it might be somebody at the district level as opposed to somebody at the school itself. Number two, who approves the purchase of this product? And again, it may not be the same person. In many cases, it might be somebody at the district level who approves a certain purchase, and then you need people in the field at the actual schools who benefit from it. Or it could be the student that benefits from it, but the teacher makes the decision. Or it could be the teacher makes a decision, and then the administrators benefit from it or not, depending on how good a decision the teacher made. And I'm sure as you're thinking about your startups, you're already beginning to think, if you haven't already done so, who wears the hats, and they're probably not the same person. And lastly, who pays for your product? Now, in some cases, that is the same as the person who approves it, but it's not always the case. In many cases, it could be approved by the district, but then the schools themselves have to pay for it, or vice versa. And in some cases, especially in higher ed, it might be a professor who approves it, but the student who pays. And the example I'm thinking about there is, in many cases, textbook purchases or course packs are determined by the professor, sometimes with guidance from his department head. But at the end of the day, it's something the student has to pay for out of his or her pocket. So again, think very carefully about all these. And if you're not talking to people who represent all 3 of those roles, you're missing important customer feedback. So, and I'm just going to warn you, I don't see the chat window. I just couldn't keep the chat window up while I was doing this and still actually see my screen. So I will pause after the first part of this presentation, after the feedback session, but before going into the advice for foreign startups to take questions. I hope that's okay. Okay, as you prepare for the meeting, you really want to understand, what are you going in there? You're not just going to go in there and say, gee, I kind of want to talk to them and pick their brains. You want to be very, very specific, right? So number one, what am I trying to achieve, right? Am I trying to, just understand if this is the right person and how they make their decision, or am I trying to understand specifically, are they likely to purchase my product or not? And there are many other variations on that theme. Number two, you understand, what exactly am I trying to learn? So sometimes you want to understand exactly what the requirements are for that particular person that your product needs to meet. In other cases, you're trying to figure out what you can look at, what characteristics you can look at to determine whether or not the customer of that particular type, whether they're a high likely prospect or they're not really a good prospect for your product. And more specifically, I like to go in there, I treat it like a science experiment, right? I have a thesis. I'm trying to prove or disprove my thesis. So to take the last point and get a little bit more specific about it, I may have a thesis that my product is good for charter schools in poor economic districts. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to talk to the principals of those charter schools in the poor districts in our country, and I'm going to see whether or not my product is a good fit for them, whether or not it's worthwhile use of their budget. And I'll know by the end of talking to 20 or 30 of them whether or not that thesis is proved or disproved. And if you're ever kind of stuck, a good kind of rule of thumb is to ask yourself this. This meeting that I'm about to go into, it's successful if, and then you complete that sentence. And it's usually just one sentence. And that can kind of cut through and clarify a lot of the questions you might have over whether or not, what should I be getting out of this? What should the main focus of this meeting be? Once you have your objective down, you want to do two things. One is you want to make sure your team is on the same page. I generally like going in with at least one other teammate. They can focus on taking notes while I'm talking. They can prod me if I'm forgetting something, and occasionally if the vibe is just better between them and the customer, I'm happy letting them do it. But you want to make sure that everyone knows what their role is. Nothing makes a meeting go south, whether it's a customer meeting or an investor meeting, than having the team talking over each other, interrupting each other, potentially disagreeing with each other. So, have a very good sense of who's going to be doing most of the talking, how you're going to pass the baton, if you're going to pass the baton, when somebody else should chime in or when they should just kind of, bite their tongue, make a note and talk to you about it later. All those things will help this meeting actually go smoother and help you get more out of it. And last, and certainly not least, is know your audience. Right? When you know the person that you're going into, you want to do a little background research on them. One of the tools that I use a lot as a company is an app called Charlie. It's charlieapp.com. In the interest of full disclosure, it is a Dreamit company, but actually I was using it even before I joined Dreamit. What it does is it will send you about an hour before the meeting a briefing on the other person you're going to meet with, including links to their LinkedIn profile, their Twitter profile, some quotes, links to web pages about articles that reference their employer, and enough information there just so you can get a sense of who you're talking to. You don't have to use Charlie. There are other briefing tools out there, or you can just simply go to LinkedIn and check out that person's profile and the jobs he's had before. Either way is fine, but the last thing you want to do is to go in totally cold. One of the things I like doing in particular is when I go and check out their LinkedIn profile, I look for people who we have in common, and that's generally a pretty good conversation starter. You can play geography with them, as we like to say, for a couple of minutes beforehand and establish that you know some people in common. So that actually is a pretty good segue into how do you actually start this meeting. And I said this was going to be very, very hands-on, very tactical, and this is one of the slides I was referring to. One of the first things out of your mouth should be, I just want to be sure that we're on the same page here. I have this down as a 1-hour meeting. Is that still good for you? The reason you do this is if you think you have a 1-hour meeting and they think they have a half-hour meeting, guess what happens to your success metrics? You're gonna miss half of them. You think you have all the time in the world to discuss how your product's working, you have a whole list of questions, and you only get half of them done. So number one thing you do is politely confirm that you're on the same page as far as how much time you have. Number two, and this is related to the point I was making before, bring up again how you were connected. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I book meetings, it's 3 weeks later, and I don't remember how I got connected with that person. In an ideal world, I take 2 or 3 minutes, I search through my email and I figure that out. In practice, probably about 20 or 30% of the time, I walk into a meeting and I have no clue how or even why I'm meeting this person. So, if you're going in there and you're trying to get the most out of this meeting, you should know that, and you should say, Andrew, hey, I'm really glad you were able to take this meeting. Just as you recall, I'm pretty sure it was Elizabeth who introduced us via email a couple of weeks ago. She said that you would be a good person to tell about how your district makes purchasing decisions, something like that. You also want to level set the conversation, and that's kind of a business slang here. What it really means is you want to make sure that you know exactly who you're talking to, and they kind of know what you want to get out of it. So, for instance, you may go in there thinking you're talking to an expert in the field. They might have a PhD in chemistry, right? You're selling a chemistry app. And you will automatically, if you think that's the case, start talking using terms that someone who's got deep knowledge of chemistry would know kind of off the top of their head. Now, if you've made a mistake, right, and if it's not someone who has deep industry expertise and may just be an administrator with a passing familiarity with the subject, you're going to lose him or her with the terms that you're using. So, find a polite way to figure out kind of where they are on that kind of expertise level, and talk in an appropriate way to them. And you also want to get a sense of their work background, because that'll also help you talk to them more effectively. This related to that is understanding their roles. You want to understand what their title is, and if they have a sense going in there what you think their authorities are and their responsibilities are. But confirm it with them. You can say, hey, my understanding is that you're involved in curriculum development for your district. I think, from what I understand, you're the head of that department, and most of the curriculum that your school approves has to go through your office. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then if they are, you suddenly know maybe you're not talking to the right person, but it's important for you to know that at the outset of the meeting rather than 45 minutes later. And again, you got to be a little careful about how you phrase it. You don't want it to come off like you're saying, my understanding is that you're the right person to talk to. Please correct me if you're actually, a junior flunky and I shouldn't be wasting my time. You have to be careful about how you phrase that, but it's not that hard to do when it just takes a little bit of thinking about in advance. It'll also help you later on when you're trying to figure out what their purchase decision is and maybe get a sense of whether or not they would buy your product, understanding whether they're a decision maker who approves the actual purchase, one of several people who are part of the discussion, who are totally unrelated to that decision. Those are pretty critical pieces of information. Then, before you actually start talking, it's worth you making explicit to them what your goals are for that meeting. All right, so you've had that back in your mind. This meeting is a success if, and you want to understand if the example I gave before is if this product is relevant to poor school districts, or the charter schools and poor school districts, then you can say, hey, I'm meeting with you because I have this product which I think will improve performance in charter schools, especially in poor districts. I want to see if that's the case or not. Another example might be, I have a product that services higher ed. I know it's really good for 4-year universities. I'm not sure if it's a good fit for community colleges, 2-year colleges, where people start their university and then they kind of move on. Sorry, I wouldn't define the terms if I was talking to someone to a community college. It just occurred to me that that may not be a term that everyone outside of the U.S. is familiar with. So if that's the case, you're basically trying to say to them, you tell me, are we on the same page here? You tell me if what I want to get out of the meeting is something you can't give me. He might say, well, wait a second, our district is actually pretty rich. And if that's the case, you need to know that and take that data with a grain of salt. And the last thing I always say before going into it is I'll use some variation of, and please be entirely blunt. You cannot hurt my feelings. Or, I have this great idea. I think it's awesome. I want you to think about it critically and break it for me. And the idea there is people are nice. Even people who are not overtly nice, they avoid conflict. So they're sometimes unwilling to give you the God's honest truth. They'll try to sugarcoat it. They'll try to say things that are a little nice. And sometimes they do it subconsciously because part of human nature is a desire to be liked. So if you want someone to give you what could be bad news, you have to kind of give them permission, right? Kind of morally say, hey, I'm not going to be offended, right? Whereas I sometimes say, listen, I'm about to spend the next 3 to 5 years of my life working on this. If it's fatally flawed, I need to know it now. So, please be blunt, do your best you can to point out where the weaknesses are here. Because you're not doing me any favors by just telling me all's good when it really isn't. Okay, let's keep it going. Okay, now we're actually into the meat of the meeting. So you've set your expectations, you're all on the same page, you're talking to the right people. Remember when I said earlier that all you really need for early customer feedback is a positioning statement? Well, this is what it is. And the elements of a positioning statement are who it's for, that's your target market, the problem that you're actually solving, and it should be a real pain point, the benefits of your solution. Notice I said benefits, not features, right? Benefits are why I want to use it. Features are what you actually do. You want to cover the benefits, who the competitors are, and why you're better than them. So there's, I don't know if you're familiar with this, is a game in the States for kids when they're younger called Mad Libs. And it's a fill in the blank. So it'll say, I need a noun here. I need a verb here. I need an adjective here. And the kids will just fill it in. And because they don't know what the story's about, the person that you're talking to doesn't, it often comes out. And it's kind of funny. This is kind of like a Mad Lib, only the goal here is not to be funny, but to be concise. So for your particular target customer who, and here's where the pain point goes, this product that's in the category of XYZ has these benefits, and unlike the competition, we can do X, Y, and Z. So I'll make it very concrete. There's a company in the program that went through just this past December called LearnMetrics. So if I were the founder of Julian, I might say, we service K-12 school districts who have this massive data coming in from all these different assessments and the apps, usage reports, and various other sources, but can't make sense of it because it's just spread out and it's not linked to the students in a consistent way. So, our product, LearnMetrics, is essentially a business intelligence tool for education that aggregates all the information, knits it together in a way that you can make sense of it, very concisely delivers actionable recommendations for a particular student. And unlike the other tools out there, there's no one else that really pulls that all together and will automatically make these recommendations. So that's what I mean, and that's what this actual positioning statement might sound like in practice. Okay, so in retrospect, this slide might actually be better a little earlier up. We talked about what you're going to do and how to prepare for it. The question I often get is, where should this meeting take place? Can I do it via Zoom? Or, can I have them come to my office? Or can I meet them at a conference somewhere? And the answer is, ideally, you want to be at their office. And I know it's a pain in the butt traveling, and I know sometimes it's very expensive. You can't do it. But if at all possible, you go to them. And there are a couple of good reasons for this. Number one, if it's easy for them, you're more likely to get the meeting. Very practical. You get nothing if they won't meet with you. Number two, they're going to be more comfortable in their own environment. They're more likely to give you the candid feedback simply because they're on their home field. And also, and this is not to be understated, they can pull other people into the conversation. So let's say you're talking to them and you're asking them, okay, I really like to understand how you make the decision to purchase a product like mine. And your target might say, well, there's a committee of 3 or 4 people, and we all discuss the product. And then if he's at his own office, he can say, you know what? Maria's just in the office next door. She's on the committee. Why don't I bring her in? Why don't you tell her what your product does and get a sense of what she thinks? And that's gold. That's great. Doesn't happen if they're in your office or at a conference. So if you're at their office, a lot of good things can happen. And there's also things that that you can just kind of observe by being there. So workflow in general. Now this is a little bit more of a situation if you're dealing with different types of products. It's not as directly relevant to education, but let's say you're selling a worker safety tool. If you can actually walk around their shop floor and see how product is moving through the manufacturing facility, you may unearth critical information for how your product needs to work. And you can also see firsthand what they're doing to address the pain point. However, ineffective or however kind of difficult to do, you're seeing how they're actually coping with that problem. The truth is, somehow their work gets done. So they're coping with the problem. It may be extremely painful for them. It may not be a very effective solution, but whatever they're doing actually lets them function as a business or as a school. So you want to understand how they do that. And then there are other things that are a little bit more subtle. This includes that can help you build reports. So if you walk in there and you see, signed sports memorabilia from a certain team and you're a fan of that team, that gives you one more thing to bond over. And last but not least, when you're actually in a room, you can see how they respond, right? So if you're just on a phone, you don't get to see when they lean back and kind of cross their arms. they kind of get a little defensive. You don't get to see when they're kind of pausing and they're thinking about something. And that's useful information for you. And sometimes you actually get to see really, really, really cool stuff like, oh, wow, that's a proposal on their desk from one of my competitors. I didn't know they were already making a bid for this. So there's kind of some interesting competitive intelligence that you can see just by being in their office that you just don't get anywhere else. Okay, so now we talked a little bit before about, they have a problem, right? So you want to understand how painful it is. Right? It's very, very rare that a startup comes in there and they're solving something that no one cares about. But what happens all too often is they solve a problem that just doesn't matter that much. And here's what I mean by this. How painful is this problem? Oh, it's a mild annoyance. Right? Well, that's going to be harder to sell, right? Something that saves me about 5 minutes a day is going to be less critical for your client than something that, man, this is like hours of work every week. Or, you know what, I just can't do this. Like, I want to be able to do these qualitative assessments. There's no way I can do it, so I just don't do it. I just teach the best I can, but I can't tailor my approach to the individual students because I just don't have that skill or don't have the tools to make that happen. So that's, the more painful, the better, obviously. The next one is how frequently does it occur? So frequency is critical, right? So one of the most painful decisions in the education space for the student is the choice of what college they attend. It is extremely hard. It's a lot of information they need to gather from a lot of sources. There's a lot of uncertainty. It is a major decision in their life that can have consequences for the next 20, 40, or 60 years. But it happens once. It's kind of, when you think about it, that's actually hard, right? You get one shot at that student, at that customer, and then they're gone. It is much more attractive in a lot of ways to deal with a pain point that happens every month or every quarter, or at the very least every year. Every time I have to close the books for the quarter, I have to spend 10 hours reconciling these types of receivables. It's a massive pain in my butt. Well, that's good. Like, the pain point recurs every 3 months, maybe it recurs every month. That's the kind of thing that when you bring a solution to, the person you're talking to is going to kind of lean forward and say, yeah, I'd really love something like that. Now, as I also mentioned before, they're dealing with the problem somehow, right? So you want to actually explicitly say, it takes you 10 hours every month. Tell me, how exactly do you do that? And then they may pull up an Excel spreadsheet that they've pooched together and show you how every time an invoice comes in on paper, they manually type it into that spreadsheet. But understanding that workflow is critical because that's the baseline, right? That's the baseline. You need to know how much you're improving things for them. And hint, if you're only improving it a little bit, that's going to be a hard sell. People don't buy marginal improvements. They buy quantum level improvements. You have to be so much better than what they're doing now to make them want to switch or even to think about switching. So you don't know how much of an improvement you are until you truly understand what they're doing now to address the same pain point. Now, one of the more subtle questions I like to ask is, do other people have the same problem? And there are a couple of reasons to ask that. So many of you probably are solving problems from your own personal experience that were extremely painful for you in a prior role. And a lot of entrepreneurs, their logic goes something like this. Man, that was so painful for me. I wish I had a product that could do this. Okay, I'm going to build a product that can do this. Well, what if you're the only person that does that? Right? What if you're the only person that cares about it? Well, then you have a market of one and not so interesting, right? So actually explicitly going out there and getting their sense of how widespread the problem is critically important. So for instance, when we review startups for our program, I like to have people from Penn State, one of the largest public university systems in the United States, who's a partner of our program. I have Jeff at the table with me. And when we turn off the interview and I turn to Jeff and say, would you partner with these guys? And he'll say yes or no, whatever it is. But he's actually pretty good at this right now. So he'll say yes. And I think every public university in the country would have the same problem. Or no, But that's because we're a little different. But I do think that schools like X, Y, and Z would jump at this. So he's already thinking, I don't have to ask him anymore. He's already thinking how widespread the problem is. But the guys that you're talking to, the customers, they're not used to thinking that way. So you need to explicitly ask them that. And the other reason to do that is, remember how I said earlier, people want to be liked. They don't want to tell you bad news. So very often, and they aren't even conscious of this, very often they will subconsciously say, oh, I really like what you're doing. Oh, I absolutely pay for that, right? But those surveys or those answers don't actually bear out in the real world, because they're doing it partly to be liked. Subconsciously, again, no one actually thinks, I don't like their product, I'm going to tell them that it's good just so they don't get mad at me. It's subconsciously they overestimate their willingness to use a problem. However, if you ask them whether they think their peers will use it, then you get the blunt, God's honest truth. So, yeah, I'd pay $10,000 for your product, but my colleague at the school down the street, he's a cheap bastard. You'll never get 10 grand out of him. And guess which answer is more likely to reflect the market as a whole? Yeah, other people's, do you think your peers would do X? That actually tracks better to reality than what would you do. So it's critically important that, you also ask, okay, I get how you would do it. What about everybody else? Now, sometimes you're going to go in there thinking, I've got the solution to a really painful, very frequent problem. Yeah, everyone's got it. And the person you're talking to goes, not so good, right? Not really a problem for me. It's mildly inconvenient, but I have bigger things to do with my time. Okay, well, that's not the ideal answer, but you need to really dig in, because here's where there's some really important lessons for you. So number one, you want to kind of take a step back and make sure you're talking to the right person, right? So by the right person, it could be, am I talking to the right type of institution? I know people want my product, but wait, this guy's at a community college. Maybe it doesn't work for community colleges. Maybe it only works for four-year institutions. So you want to kind of delve into that. Also, it might be you're dealing with the wrong person at the institution. Right, so you're selling what you think is a retention solution, and people are. This is again a higher ed example. People in universities are extremely focused on reducing their transfer out and dropout rates. And this guy doesn't seem to care. So you might go back and say, hey, you're in academic affairs, aren't you? Let me ask you, the dropout rate at your school, what is it? And they'll say, whatever it is. And is that something that you're measured on, right? Or who's responsible for bringing that down as low as possible? And they might say, oh, no, that's not academic affairs. That's student engagement, or that's, we have a new department called retention. So they might not be responding to your product because they might be the wrong person. They might have a title that sounds like it's their responsibility, but in actuality, it belongs to someone else. And then lastly, last of the good answers might be that you just didn't describe it very well. Maybe they just didn't think it was important because they think you're something else. So you might want to go back and, that's really strange. That's not what I'm used to hearing. I just want to make sure, I described it adequately. And then try another way to describe what you're doing. Now, occasionally you'll go through that entire checklist, and it's the right customer. You described a problem. You described it properly. It's a widespread problem, and they're still not interested, right? So it might just be that your solution is just not good. But you just have to be open to the possibility that after all that, there's something, it's not them, it's you. It could be that as well. And that's amazingly useful information, because it will save you 3, 5 to 7 years of your life going down a blind path. But that's your last resort. Before you assume that's the case, you want to make sure there weren't these other problems we just talked about. Now, sometimes they'll tell you, here's why I need it. Very often that first answer is not the real answer. And there's a Japanese management technique called the 5 whys, where no matter what their first answer is, you ask why again. And they'll go like layer by layer a little deeper into what the problem is. So it might be, we need the solution because too many of our kids are dropping out. Why are so many of your kids dropping out? well, a lot of them, they just don't feel like they fit in our school. Well, why don't they feel like they fit in at your school? It's like, well, they don't really have that much interaction with their other students. They tend to like go back to the room and just play, video games or go on chat rooms. Like, well, why do you think they do that? It's like, well, um, our dorms are 10 miles from school. I don't know, I'm making that up. But as you can see, the more you drill down, the more you've gone from what, their initial statement of the problem was is everyone's dropping out, to the deeper cause, which is the students just aren't creating bonds with their fellow students. And that tells you a lot, because if you thought they're just dropping out, you might create an app that just sends them, flashcards as your solution for just helping them succeed better at school, and thinking that'll keep them in that university, when you're missing the actual underlying cause of the problem. It's something totally different. Okay, so let's assume you got the right people at the table. You've effectively described your problem, and they have confirmed, oh yeah, I have that problem. It's really big. And you drill down and you determined that the underlying cause of that problem is what you thought it was. So now you have to show them your solution. And you want to see how they respond to that. So again, you start with the benefits. You say, listen, the whole goal here is to get those students out of their dorm rooms and meeting other students. So we have this really cool engagement app that has this feed of all the other activities going on around campus. And we're very smart about how we prod them to go to this event versus that event. Again, I'm making it up. It's actually one of the companies that went through the last program, a company called Involvio, is something like that. I said, and that'll get them out of their room, and based on our experience with our other schools, that'll get them actually interacting face to face with a lot of their peers. And our thesis is that once they're doing that, they'll be happier at the school and they'll fit in. They're less likely to leave for a different school. What do you think about those benefits? Do you think those will actually move the needles, right? Good first question. They might say, yeah, I don't know. They'll get out there, they'll meet other students, they'll be equally depressed. Probably not. But you want to get a sense for how they respond to those benefits. Do they lean forward and say, yeah, that's really a great solution? Or do they kind of lean back and say, not so much? The next thing you want to do is you want to probe down and say, okay, if these are the benefits we're delivering, how do we measure that? How do you guys measure these things? Do these measurements actually factor into their compensation? Right. So this is actually a little sensitive question to ask, but you can do that if you're very tactful. There are a lot of times where you can measure certain things, but there's a business school adage: you get what you measure. Right. So if I measure something and my bonuses or my ability to get promoted are dependent on bringing that dropout rate down, then I'm going to be super focused on a solution that solves it. If that's not part of my compensation, or if what you're solving is something different, that's nice to have. Like, it's really nice to have a lot of students going to these events, but I don't, I'd not, it doesn't put another dollar in my pocket. I'm going to be a little less motivated to actually use your product. So you really want to understand when you report to your superiors, what are they looking? What's on their dashboard going forward? Okay, assuming you're aligned there, you then want to get a sense for, okay, how does that stack up to what you're currently doing? Or how does it stack up to the competition? And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more. And you just want to get their sense, kind of their gut level, top level. Wow, this is so much better. And regardless of how they respond, you say, okay, I'm glad to hear that it's doing something for you. What would make it even more powerful? And this is a really cool part of the conversation, because now you're engaging their creative juices. And you'll start hearing phrases like, yeah, that would be really cool, but what would be even cooler if we could also do this. And that's going to be golden advice for you in terms of the additional features you're going to add, because those features potentially will supercharge the benefits that are already critical to these customers. So the competition, like a lot of people sometimes say, well, I don't want to tell anyone about the competition. Why should I tell them about other companies that they can, deal with rather than my own? And I think that's a mistake. I mean, you're not educating them as to competition. They probably already know the competition pretty well. If it's some obscure company in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't matter. They're an obscure company in the middle of nowhere. So just be open about it. And you can start with an open-ended question. You can say, so who else in the space is doing this kind of thing? Or, who else do you or your colleagues look at when you're trying to move the needle on these metrics? And they will list a couple of companies, and maybe they're the exact same as yours. Maybe they'll come up with competitors that you haven't heard of, which is critical for you for a couple of reasons. Number one, they may be a competitor that's out of left field for you, just didn't know someone else was in the space. Or maybe there's somebody that you don't think is a competitor for you. Maybe you think, wow, they don't do this at all. So you need to drill a little deeper, right? Because one of two things has happened. Either, sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that. I thought I had a chat coming in. Either they misunderstood what your product is, right? So if they're thinking that someone that you don't think is your competitor, and they list them as a competitor, they might be confusing you in what you actually do. So that's number one. Or number two, this competitor actually solves a problem in a way you didn't think about. It may not be a great way to solve the problem, but something about how they do it kind of indirectly gets to the solution for their problem. And you want to understand that. Now, in many cases, the people you're talking to will not list certain companies that you think are competitors. Now, if they are relatively big players in the space that you know that the people you're talking to know about them, you might say, oh, okay, thank you, that's great. I'm wondering, you didn't bring up Naviance. I'm just curious, why don't you consider them kind of in the space? And half the time they'll say, oh no, you're absolutely right, I should have mentioned them. I didn't bring them up because I just don't use them. I think they suck. But I know a lot of my colleagues do. But in other cases, they'll come back and say, well, they don't really solve this problem. And again, that's interesting to you for the same two reasons, right? Number one, maybe you didn't explain your product properly, right? You are actually touching the same thing that they're doing, but your meeting guy, the guy that you're talking to, didn't get that. Or number two, you may think they're competition, but maybe the market thinks they don't do that at all. Maybe the market understands that other potential competitor totally differently. Or again, maybe they suck so badly that nobody thinks of them for that. So that's gold for you to understand. And then as you have that list of all the competitors, it's good to kind of ask them, okay, so when you put us side by side with them, where are we stronger and where are we weaker? And that will help give you a sense of what you need to do to sell your product effectively. Okay, one other opportunity there you have in this meeting, actually test your pricing. I alluded to this a little before. It's you're not going to get really great data on would you buy this or not. It's just, a lot of people, it may be a little bit too, too hypothetical. You won't really know that until you actually put something on the table. You can try, but I'm sorry. I have a question here that I'm going to answer in a moment. So just hang on. I will answer it. But what you can do is you can kind of get a sense of what you're thinking about charging roughly in the right ballpark. And also you can get a sense of like what the right way to charge for it is. So number one, is this valuable enough what we're doing? Is it better enough that you would seriously consider switching? And that's your question, like, am I a quantum level improvement better, or am I just kind of a marginal improvement? And then you can try to ask like how valuable it is, but you really want to get a sense of, okay, so what are you paying for your current solution, if you don't mind my asking? Okay, you're paying $20,000 a year for this solution. You've told me that this is like 2 or 3 times as valuable. Does that mean that you could do $40,000 a year for what we're talking about? And if they come back and say, I'd love to pay $40,000 a year for your solution, I just don't have the budget for it. There's no way I can sell that. you can have a conversation around that. And then what you can also talk about is how you do it. So one way is you could do a fixed price per year. In many cases, it's a per student charge, or it might be a per student per semester type of charge. But you want to get a sense of how they think about it, because different products are priced in different ways. You want to make sure you're talking that same language. So if you're going in there trying to sell something on a per student per year basis, but everyone else in the industry is selling it on a flat fee, that's just one more hurdle you'll have to pass. So really understand this. And there's a really kind of cool technique that I was taught called flinch pricing. So if you're worried about putting that first price on the table, you can say, I was thinking about charging $10,000 a year for it. And if, the person you're talking to just doesn't say anything, they're smiling like, that's okay, right? You may have underpriced. So then you might say per semester, right? 3 semesters a year. Okay, you just basically raised the price on them to $30,000. Did they flinch? They still didn't flinch. Then you might say 30,000 a year per semester per college, right? There may be 3 or 4 colleges inside a given institution. So you can keep raising that price by adding those qualifiers until they say, well, that's a lot of money. And then you know kind of where the resistance points are. Okay, let me take a pause here because I've got some questions coming up here. Is how do you find U.S. clients for the interview from Russia? So that's a little bit of a separate conversation. When you prospect for clients, you should, if you've gone through some of the exercises we said before, you should understand ideally the title of the person and the type of institution that you're looking at. So let's assume that you're a K-12 focused startup and that you're selling, okay, let's make it really easy. Let's say you're selling a product that has to do with teaching math to students in K through 8. I'll make it even simpler, middle school, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. If you believe that the decision maker for your product, the person who approves it, first line is teachers, then you could look for teachers who are teaching that subject, and it might be something you can pull off of LinkedIn. You may need to go to different districts and go through their personnel, but you can go systematically through. Once you know the type of person that you need to look to, you can go institution by institution, district by district, and find those people and reach out to them directly. There are very rarely any shortcuts like that. There are some groups out there who've compiled lists of superintendents, principals. Some of them have large pools of teachers. So you can pay for these lists, but you often don't have to. And we're talking something in the order of magnitude of 20, 40, 60 interviews, maybe 100 interviews. If you need to interview people, different person pays and the person who approves and the person who benefits. So if that's the case, you probably have to do 20 or 30 interviews for each type. But you should be able to find a list of that many people on your own without having to go out and pay exorbitant amounts of money for somebody to sell you a list. Yeah. Now, how do you reach out for them? It sounds like you've kind of answered that question a little bit on your own, but yeah, warm introductions tend to be the best. So if you have somebody in common, you ask them for an introduction. If you don't, you can try reaching out by email and then setting up a time. Again, in person is so much better than a phone call, but if you're in Russia and they're in the States, sometimes that's the best you can do. I would opt for a video over a phone call. It gives you a little bit more insight into how they're responding, their body language. It's a little more personal. Though ideally, if you have a list of a bunch of customers, it's worth making a trip, especially if they're all clustered in a city. One of the tricks I sometimes use to get meetings is I will send out an email or usually an email to a bunch of people in a city and say, hey, I'm planning on being in New York the week of February 20th. And I'm meeting with a bunch of different, fill in the blank, there are a bunch of different teachers and principals at the schools. I'd love to meet you while I'm in town. So that creates a little bit more kind of urgency for him. Oh, he's going to be in town for this week. I'll find a way to meet with him. And then if a lot of people say, yeah, sure, you can fill up enough meetings, then I book my trip. If I only get 2 or 3, then I kind of write back to those 2 or 3 and say, hey, I'm really sorry something came up. I can't be in New York that week. Can we set up a video call instead? So that's one way of, before you buy your ticket or committing to it, making sure you have the enough interviews lined up that it justifies the trip. But I can't stress enough, going to them and going them in person rather than on a video is so much more effective, both for what you want to do and later when you're trying to sell to them. They'll remember, man, this company came all the way from Russia to meet with us in person. They are committed to the US market. We're going to get more to that later in the second half of the presentation. I'm just going to go down the chat list here and make sure I've got some of the questions. One of the questions is, I'm focusing on the benefits of the customers. What about considering addressing customer pains too? Okay, so I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about this. The benefit is very simple. If I have a massive pain point and you solve it in a certain way, that's a benefit. If it's, this is what it does, that's a feature. So if you understand their pain points appropriately, then your pain points, your benefits have to map on them one-to-one. If you have a benefit that doesn't have anything to do with a pain point, it's not a benefit at all. So the other question was, what kind of pain points do I observe in EdTech today? That could be a 3-hour conversation on its own. Everything from specific techniques to teach certain subjects like coding, that's a very hot topic, all the way through to the kind of the intelligence layer. Like we're being measured for the first time on quantitative data, right? Over the past decade or so, there's been the requirement to collect this data and the actual consequences for not improving on those metrics. Schools can get shut down. More charters can be opened up if the public schools are not performing. So for the first time in a very long time, the schools are really answerable. So making sense of that and actually making progress against those metrics are kind of a very large pain point. There's also a lot of debate depending, this is state by state. One of the things you should know about the US market is there is no such thing as the US market in EdTech. Each state is radically different, and in many cases within each state, each district is different. As if it wasn't complicated enough, I know. I'll give you one kind of broad example. In most states in the country, a teacher who has worked for a ridiculously short amount of time, as short as 3 years, can get tenure, and it's very hard to fire them. Florida, the state of Florida, recently, in the past couple of years, abolished tenure for teachers. Now, all the older teachers, they have tenure. That can't be taken away. The unions were too strong for it. But all the newer teachers now are considered professionals that can be hired or fired if they don't perform. So you can imagine now that the need for teacher training and for the teachers themselves to show progress against certain metrics has suddenly shot way up. So whereas before, if you were selling a professional development tool into schools in the state of Florida, the superintendents might have cared about it, but the teachers are like, I don't really care, right? And I'm being a little cynical about it. They might be not as motivated for it because it didn't really affect whether or not they had a job. Now the younger teachers who don't have tenure are very, very concerned about making sure that their skills are up to date and they can show that they've mastered different styles of teaching and different rubrics. So anyway, I don't want to deviate too far away, but those are a few of the big pain points coming up. So I'm going to jump back into the presentation. So we talked about getting some sense of the pricing. The next thing you want to understand is how the purchase is actually made. So, who actually needs to approve it? And this is an explicit question that you ask. So, hey, I'm really glad. I appreciate all your time. I think we used about half of our time for this particular meeting, and I really appreciate it. We talked earlier about how your school actually makes these decisions. Who would actually be the person signing, literally or figuratively signing off on this? Who does he or she ask for advice on this? What's the process for this, right? Is it a 3-month process? Is it a 2-month process? Does it involve reports back and forth, or is it people sitting at a table? And where did the money come for this, right? Is it something that you need to budget for in your annual budget? Hint, in most DIS schools in the US, the budget is approved, I believe, on May 1. And if you come to them like the last couple of months prior to that, there's no budget left. And they can just say, hey, you got to wait until we have a new budget. If you come to them even too close to May 1, they might say it's too late to get you in the budget for the next year. You might have to wait another 12 months. On the other hand, depending on how much you're asking, many schools and districts, and depending on who within the school and districts, at least this might be a different number, but they have a discretionary budget where they can do certain things. If it's below $10,000, they might just be able to spend it whenever they want. But you want to understand exactly where that money is coming from, because that'll give you a sense of how much can you ask for, how quickly can you get it, what times of year do you need to ask for it in. Sorry, I think there was another question that came in, which I can't seem to get. There we go, 1 second. Oh, the question was thank you. You're very welcome. Okay, let's keep it moving along. So during the actual product demo, there's going to be some point where if you have a product, they're going to say, well, I'd really like to see what it looks like. You want to show it to them. So I get asked, what do I actually show during the demo? So if you have a mock-up, a prototype, or the real product, it doesn't matter. The number one piece of advice is focus on what your audience cares about. Right? And that seems totally obvious, but it's not. Right? So I can't tell you how many times a demo is a feature by feature. I'm going to right across the menu bar at the top and tell you everything. No, that's not an efficient use of time. I don't need to see everything, right? I need to see the things that matter to me. So what I like to do is I like to say, if I'm giving a demo, let's take this scenario, right? And I'll give them a very specific use case. Johnny is, oh, let's think of a good one. Okay, you've got students, you, School X, are trying to increase your math scores for minority students because the assessments say they were a little low. So here's how you would do that with my product. Then you jump in right into it. You go right into, by the way, also one of my pet peeves is when people just say the user does this, the user does that. As we talked about before, there are a lot of different types of users. There's teachers, there's students, there's administrators. I get lost, like I can't always tell who's who. So set that, right? You say, okay, so you want to improve test scores. So here's what you, as the principal of the school, would do. You'll go in there, you'll set up these metrics, bump, 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 and then that triggers this action. And then the teacher gets this email. So then the teacher will, and then you're actually being very, very precise about who does what. That helps quite a bit when it comes to actually making an effective demo that people understand. And again, stick to the benefits, right? It's not features, it's benefits. You always want to tie it back to what you were talking about before, right? And this will then, tell the teacher how, to get involved with the student. You want to complete that loop. And then the teacher will know that they need to allocate more time to the student so we can bring that student's performance back up to par. But again, don't go feature by feature. Don't try to show everything. Just focus on the stuff that's going to make it. One other thing, if you're going to do a demo, be logged in advance, right? Nothing is kind of more boring than watching you open up the screen and create an account. Right? And I'm going to type in my name, and I'm going to type in my email. No, that's not a good use of your time. Have that all ready to go. Okay, so now this has been most of the meeting. So the next question is, what do you do? How do you end it effectively? And again, I can't say how many people fail at this point. They go, oh, thank you very much for your time. Boom, they leave. Right? You are not getting the most out of your time if that's how you end the meeting. So number one, who else should I speak to? Right? These are customer leads, right? So in some cases, it'll be, wow, I love your product. I bet my counterpart, the principal of the school, 2 districts over, at the school 2 schools over in my same district, he'd probably love it too. Oh, that's good to hear. Could you maybe introduce me to him? Would you kind of introduce us via email? Great, that's more feedback you get, or even early potential customer interest. Then you want to be explicit about saying, hey, I really appreciate it. This is just the beginning of my set of customer meetings. It's possible that as a result of some of my other meetings, I may have more questions. Do you mind if I follow up with a quick email or even a phone call if there's something else that comes up that I just, in retrospect, know that I need to ask? They'll almost always say yes, but it's good to make that explicit. The other thing to do is ask them how you can help them, right? So many people, when they're done with the meeting, whether it's a meeting about potential investment or about feedback or about anything else, they just take, they don't give back. So actually saving a couple of minutes at the end for you to brainstorm with them about how you can help and explicitly asking to help will set you apart from 95% of the people they've spoken to. And the conversation will probably go something like this. Yeah, I really love your solution. That's great. We're also struggling with school dismissal, right? It's just chaos out there when we're sending all the kids home. I wish there was something that we could, something we could use that made that process a little smoother. And then you might say, well, funny you should mention that. There's another company in the Dream It cohort I'm in called Pick My Kid that actually has an app for that. Would you like me to introduce you to them? So now you're giving something back to them, right? And they're gonna, if you get into the habit of being that person that always has something interesting to them, even if it has nothing to do with your product, then you're the guy that they're going to want to talk to. Like when you email them again, hey, I'd like to set up another meeting, they'll take that meeting because they know that regardless of what you want to talk about with them, somehow you'll find a way to help them in that meeting. And that's a good place for you to be in. And if possible, we want to try to get a trial close. By trial close, it might be, okay, great. Everything we just talked about is going to go live in about 2 months. And we talked about the pricing. It'll probably be for your school $10,000 for the year. Should we maybe get the process rolling now? And then you see, and they might say, like, if they really love it, like, yeah, let's get purchasing it. I want this like day one when it's live. Or they might say, no. More likely, they say we need to see it live and then we can start it. But you should at least get a sense of it. In some cases, not so much in schools or in education in general, but in other industries, if it's a big enough pain point, you're doing something that's so different than anyone else, the client might say, hey, I know it's not done yet. I want to be a beta tester. And you might open up the product, incomplete, buggy, whatever it is, but they can start using it right away, and they might pay you for that. They might say, listen, I need feature X. I know you weren't going to build that right away. If I become a customer now, will you prioritize it? So that's an awesome situation to be in. It doesn't happen all that often, but I'll tell you, it happens like 0 times if you don't ask. So try to close them as much as possible. And then be explicit about the next steps, right? If you offer to help them with something, then say, okay, so it's not my homework here is I'm going to get you the information about, this other app that we just talked about, or I'll make that introduction for you. And if there's something that they were going to do for you, and so you will say, hey, I'm going to send you a follow-up email with the things that we talked about. You said you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and do the other thing. And you want to make that explicit because they might say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that until your product's live, right? So you want to be on the same page there. And you also want to make sure you haven't missed anything. And then they might say, well, I'd also like to do this. I'm like, oh, that's great. Thank you. Jot it down and then follow up with them after about it. And just for the sake of being complete, yes, you want to say thank you. You want them to understand that you really appreciate their time because time is perhaps the most valuable resource ever. Now, the question I sometimes get is customer feedback interviews are great, but what about doing a survey or an online test? Can I get the same information that way? And the answer is no. Right? The answer is flat out no. You can't get that kind of free-form qualitative information by sending out a structured survey. So you do need to start with the face-to-face meetings to get that feedback, read the body language, look for things that you're missing. Once you have that basis, once you've done a couple of dozen of those surveys, face-to-face feedback meetings, you have enough understanding of the market that if you need more data points, you can actually use a survey. And this is sometimes more relevant in the B2C space than it is in the B2B space. So with with teachers, there's tons of teachers out there. There's millions of teachers in the U.S. Principals and superintendents. There's at least 150,000 of those people in those roles in the U.S. So you can still do a survey. But let's say you were in an industry where there are 20 players, like 20 big banks, and you've spoken to the right people at all of them. Well, there's no one to survey, so that's not as relevant. But if it is something that's teacher focused, then it's totally legitimate after you've done 20 or 40 or 50 survey face-to-face interviews. If you want more kind of actionable quantitative information, to send out quick surveys, and those are good for things like testing price points or trying to quantify, is feature A more important than feature B? And sometimes though, you don't actually need to send out a survey. Sometimes you can test it much more subtly and much more effectively. What people do is a better indicator than what they say. So if you're trying to figure out, is benefit A more important than benefit B, you could just put a couple $100 onto Google AdWords, testing different types of ads, right? Do an ad rotation where one ad stresses the reduced dropout rates, and the other ad stresses, happier, more engaged students, and then see which one gets more click-throughs. And you can do that even if your product's not related, and just take them to a coming soon page, right? Maybe capture their email address on that launch page. But the important thing is, for the $100 or $200 or $300 it'll cost you to do that, you will have hard data on what gets the most clicks, and that's better than any survey. Okay, some partings and overall advice, right? Everything that I've told you before, you guys are good entrepreneurs. You're probably considering, you've got a checklist already made up, what you want to get out of it. That's good. The one thing that some entrepreneurs, they get so fixated on that checklist that they've got to go through it in that order. Don't get so stuck up on it. Right? If somebody wants to talk about something in a different order, they want to jump ahead and talk about the competition, go for it. Be flexible, go with the flow. But just remember, you just need to be aware of the clock, right? You understand like how much time you have left, and steer it back, right? So at certain points you're like, great, I totally understand who you consider the competition is. And I just want to roll it back a little bit and make sure you understand, what our key benefits are, how we're different. So be kind of smooth about that, but do get back and make sure you've checked off all the things on your list. And be ready to come up with different questions that weren't on your list, depending on how the conversation goes, because you may be getting into very interesting territory that you did not anticipate. And really, all the time, right? Keep probing. The surface answer is not always the right answer. So why? Cool. So just restating it all, number one, gold standard is meeting them in person as early as possible, preferably before you even coded, and as many times as necessary, 20, 30, 40, or 50 times. Not unusual to do that. When you're there, you want to test your positioning. Are you solving a problem that is painful and frequent? Are the benefits things that your customer respond to? Are you aware of all your competitors? Are you, in the mind of your customer, significantly different from them? And then, just in general, go with the flow, and if possible, get those referrals so you can talk to more potential customers down the road. So cool. Let me pause right now. I'm going to open up the, if I can, I'm going to open up the chat room and see if there's anyone who has questions. Okay. Volva, I have about a dozen happy customers in the US. Woohoo, good for you. No, I didn't mean to be flipped. That's actually really good. And I know they recommend our services to others after I share their contact details for a reference. Very good. That's the right way to do it. You have testimonials on the website. That's great. I've tried to ask them to introduce me to other people in the industry, but they refuse. They don't want to reach out to someone else. that person asking for it. Okay, so how do you leverage your customer base? So I have to ask, you think they're happy customers. If they're not making the introductions, maybe they're not as happy as you think. Let's assume they are happy, but they're shy. You can say, hey, can I do a self-intro? And by that, I mean, you might say, so John, you've been using the product for a year. Is it all right if I reach out to your colleague, Mary, at the school next door and say, hey, John mentioned that, John uses our software, used it for a year. He loves it. He mentioned that you might have a similar need, right? So if they're not willing to do it on their own, then you might just say, hey, can I reach out and just reference you? Then you'll get a sense, like John might say, don't tell her I told you to reach out to her. Well, it's kind of interesting to understand why he might think that. But then you can say, well, okay, how about maybe something a little subtler? How about if I say, as you may know, John at North Harrington School District uses our product. I think, based on what I understand about your school, Mary, you might have a similar problem so that we can solve. Can I set up a time to talk? So that's, you're dropping a reference of somebody that they know without actually saying that so-and-so is recommending you. That's kind of a little less good, but hopefully it's good enough. Right? But the gold standard is them doing the intro for you. One of the things you can do to make them more likely to do that is you can actually write the email form. You can say, you can send an email, John, hey, I know you know Mary at such and such school, or at least LinkedIn says you do. As you know, we do X, Y, and Z, and we've helped improve metrics X by like 50% at your school. Would you mind just forwarding this email on to her? Because I'd love to see if it's a solution for Mary's school. Sometimes just making it as frictionless as possible for them will make them more willing to do it. You've kind of put those words in their mouth, and hopefully it's something they're comfortable with. So just to recap, if you can get them to do it for you by making it as easy as possible for them, that's great. If not, if you can get their permission for you to reach out, maybe copying the other John on that email, saying John said I should talk to you, that's almost as good. And at least what you'd like to get out of is the ability to drop them as a customer, saying, as you may know, John works and uses our product. I think you have a similar problem. Can we talk? Okay, I hope that answered the question. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, self-intro may work. Good, great. Problem solved. Okay, how are we doing on time? I want to be respectful here. We are over. Okay, so I'm going to talk fast on the next one. Now, a lot of the problems that I've talked about are fairly general, or meaning they apply to US startups, foreign startups, it doesn't matter, but there are a subset of problems that you're going to face penetrating the US market that obviously customers who are already, companies that are already in the US don't have. So this is, if there's one thing that you take away from this, one kind of mindset that you get out of this is that the customers and investors that you'll talk to in the US, they're not actively looking for foreign startups. Like, there's nothing in it for them that you're foreign versus domestic. They just want great companies. So you have to approach it that way. No one's going out there and saying, I must have a Russian edtech company. I must have an Israeli edtech company. Must have a Finnish edtech company in my portfolio. You just need to prove that you're a great company, but you have a higher level of proof, right? So working with a startup or investing in a startup is risky enough regardless of where it is. Like, does the product really work? And then this is from the investor's perspective, can the founders actually sell their service to schools or large corporations? Do they have the financial runway that they will be around in 6 months, right? These are really risky things. The foreign startups, it amplifies that even more. So, there are often language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, both just one-on-one type business networking things, but even in terms of how a certain ecosystem works. give an example. I don't know if any of you guys are from Finland, but you pay your teachers really well. Your teachers consider themselves highly trained, skilled professionals. In the US, most teachers are union. And while they're motivated for their work, they are not at the same level of education or skill. So you may be going in there assuming a certain level of knowledge and motivation and professionalism that just doesn't exist here. What's more, there's a lack of a local network, right? If what we were talking about before, if you didn't have those initial 10 or 12 customers in the US, you're coming in from scratch. And the fact that a school in Tel Aviv or a school in Buenos Aires uses your solution is not going to carry the same weight when you're talking to a school in New York than it would be if other schools in New York are using it. Then there's just general issues of logistical issues, right? You're 8 or in some cases 12 hours away. I went to Korea, met with some great companies, but when I wanted to follow up with them, everything was a 12-hour lag. Right? So there's time zone issues that actually factor into how hard it is maybe to work with a foreign startup. And on a more, a higher level, investors and corporate partners or education partners may just wonder, how important is the U.S. market to you, right? So if and this is where smaller countries actually have an advantage, right? A lot of the countries that come in from like Israel or Estonia, Costa Rica, these are small domestic markets. They're not going to get rich. They're immediately thinking about Europe or the U.S. from day one. Right? That's what's going to make or break their company. But let's say you're from France or Germany. You got a pretty big domestic market. And I, as a customer here, an investor here, I might think, most of your resources are already allocated towards handling your domestic market. Are problems that you have to deal with only for the U.S. market, changes you have to make to your feature set, are they going to be the highest priorities for you, or are they going to be less important? And last but not least, the legal systems are different, right? So as an investor, I know what the U.S. laws are. I know what a Delaware C Corp does. I know what happens in certain situations. I'm pretty comfortable in Canada and in most of Europe. But I had a company, this is a true example, it's Austrian guys living in Israel, and their company is incorporated in Malta. I have to think really hard about what happens when they raise money, or what happens if we have any kind of dispute. I don't know, right? That's an added layer of complication I need to think about. And the same goes for commercial disputes. If a customer's paid you for something and then you don't deliver, in the U.S., they know exactly what they can do. It may not be great, but they know what the recourse is. Trying to get assets back that have crossed international borders, that's a lot harder. So all those things that make a startup either risky to invest in or risky to work with, plus all these other things that you have to cope with. You as foreign startups have to cope with. So very simple. Those are the list of things that make it harder for people to work with foreign startups. You need to go step by step through that list and try to mitigate each one so that they become less of an issue. So let's talk about them step by step. So number one, you got to learn English. I'm sorry. Let's go through the obvious reasons why. Most Americans don't speak your language. It's just the case. It's one of those stereotypes, but it's true. So you have to learn English. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? Accents, not a big deal. The grammar doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be fluent enough that we can talk at a regular pace. So if you need a translator there and everything takes twice as long, that's a problem. So, I don't care if your pronouns are off. I don't care if your accent's a little different than me, but it can't impact our ability to do business. Cool. And in addition to the actual logistical issues, the better your English is, the less I worry about us misunderstanding each other, and me saying I need something and you thinking that's something else. And also, for no other reason than learning the local language shows commitment to the market, because it's hard, right? And if you've actually taken the time to do that, that's a plus. Now, many of you are in countries where English is given as a second language fairly early, in some cases in lower school. That's not the case in the States very much, but this is a guy that you should probably recognize. He spent the better part of the last 4 years learning Mandarin. right? Mandarin is a tough language, but he thinks that the future of Facebook is in China. So he is taking painful steps with his own time, which is incredibly valuable, as you know, to be able to communicate in their language to them. That shows commitment. Number two, another thing you can do is to have someone on your team who's bicultural, right? So imagine a situation. It's like, hey, I'm born and raised in Finland. My cousin John, my co-founder John, he went to school in Colombia, worked in New York for 3 years, and now he came back to Finland, found the company. Okay, so what does that matter? Why does it matter? So number one, again, miscommunication is less of an issue, right? John's been in the States, he understands States, right? If you tell me something and I think I get it, John can be there to say, Andrew, you don't quite get it. That's not what they mean, right? And what's more, it means that if you're trying to do business in the States, John's got relevant experience in the market, may even have the beginning of a network here. So it kind of reduces those concerns that I might have as a potential partner of yours in the States. Now, just be entirely clear here, John's got to be a co-founder, right? If you're hiring, junior associate, and he's the guy that's been to the States, that's not going to give you as much benefit here as if John's like a true co-founder. Okay, now this one's going to be a little controversial and certainly a little harder given the current administration, but nothing shows commitment to the US market like moving here, right? In many cases, it might just be the CEO or the CMO. He'll come to New York and open up a small office, right? And he's committed to being here for a year or 2 years or 3 years. In some cases, they brought their families along. It really means that number one, you're committed. Number two, you're close to your customer. You can be more responsive. You can actually go to them in person and see how they respond when you talk to them. And that's gold when it comes to be successful in any country, but particularly in the US. You don't need to move the entire team. In a lot of cases, you end up with a team where 1 or 2 senior people move to the States, but the programmers and the operations team stay in the home country, and that works. Now, there is a critical difference between opening up a sales office and putting senior management, right? Oh, I hired a guy to be in New York. That's nice. You found someone in New York to be there. Your focus, your attention, the majority of your clothes are still back in your home country. That's not the same level of commitment. It's better than nothing, but it's not the same level of commitment. Okay, let's say you're coming to New York. There, in most large U.S. cities, we have a large number of people from other countries, which means that there are intact expatriate networks that you may be able to tap into. There are a boatload of Israeli founders in New York and San Francisco. There's a group called the C100 of Canadian entrepreneurs that now reside in California. There are events that your local council or embassy might arrange. I'm thinking particularly the Polish embassy has done some very interesting events. Korea has done some very interesting events as well, and I'm sure a bunch of other countries are. So I don't mean to imply that if I haven't called out your country by name, your consul is not pulling their weight. But you have to ask. You have to make yourself known. I venture to say most countries at this point, their consulates in large cities will have some kind of some department for small businesses and startups who are looking to get business from that home country. Now, why is this important, right? So number one, somebody who is from your home country but has been living in the States for a long period of time, they're a good person to talk to about, hey, will this fly in the States, right? You can kind of quietly take them aside and say, hey, I want you to listen to my pitch. Tell me, is that going to work, or is that, is that going to just rub people the wrong way? Plus, it gives you a built-in network when you want to ask those warm introductions. And then also, when when you're discussing your product with them, they're a good sense of like whether or not this is going to fly in the States, right? I have a service that does X, Y, and Z. Do you think it'll work in the States? Like, man, my kids go to public school here. I know their teachers. They're really nice people, but they're just not that sharp. They just can't use your product. You have to change your interface. You have to dumb it down a bit. I keep saying that, and I don't mean to slam teachers, but it's just an example that comes up from time to time. Now, there's a caveat here. There's a warning that goes with this. You will get advice from people who've been here a long time. Some of the advice will not make sense to your business, right? So they can tell you about cultural norms, but if they don't know anything about education, and they're going to tell you what'll work and what doesn't work, take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? A successful real estate guy is not going to be able to tell you anything about selling to schools. Next step, and this is to mitigate the last bullet point there, is to set up a U.S. legal entity. There are a couple of reasons, right? So you want to make it understandable. So ideally what will happen is the U.S. entity will own your home country entity. That's a big step. That's usually what you need to do if you want to raise money from a U.S. VC fund. And the reason for that is now they know what they're getting, right? They own the parent company. And then sometimes they're okay where if you want to set up sister companies where the company back home will license the intellectual property, the patents, the brands, the copyrights over to the U.S. entity, and the U.S. entity has exclusive worldwide use to them. That might work if there's tax benefits to it, but it's just one more thing that they need to think about. And one of the truisms in this business is don't make me think. If I don't have to think about the legal side, I have more brain power available to think about things like, oh, your business itself. The other subtle thing that the legal entity does is it means that the assets are in the U.S. And I mean, really, you have to move the assets, some of the assets into the U.S., and that gives me as a partner a little bit of comfort level that if I need to get my assets back from you and we have a dispute, I can seize it without having to try to figure out who I can get in Costa Rica to try to seize assets from you there. So this is supposed to be a very, very ornate bank lobby. As I look closer to it, I'm not sure if it's a bank after all, but there's a question like, why does a bank lobby have to be that ornate? Why can't it just be a room that you go into? And let me roll you through the thought exercise here. Back 100 years ago, if you were thinking about, do I trust this bank with my money? There were all sorts of stories out there where banks would come, they'd fold, and like deposits would just be gone. Like con men disappeared with the money. So a bank that spent millions of dollars to build a really big, impressive marble and brass building, they don't do that if they're planning on skipping off with your money in 6 months. They can't. So this was a way for the bank to signal to its customers, you can trust us. We're here to stay. This investment only makes sense if we plan on being your bank for the next 100 years plus. So, with that in mind, things like setting up a legal entity or taking steps that are difficult to reverse are your ways of reassuring your local customers in the U.S. or U.S. investors that you mean it, you are committed. Let me give you a couple of last thoughts just on this in general. So we're not a piggy bank, right? A lot of startups come here and they think, oh, I got my business back in Europe. I'm going to come to the U.S. I'm going to raise money. I'm just going to keep my business going in Europe. That doesn't work, right? We don't. Why would we fund that? We don't understand your local market, right? What's more, there are investors probably in your local market. Why aren't they investing in it, right? So why are we so lucky, right? So if you're just going to come here and raise money and go back to your own country, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Number two, you need to show us that you get it. Right? Things move really, really fast in startups in general, especially in the U.S. We want to get to the sense that you're not going to have all the answers. You're not always going to have times to study the market in details. Sometimes you're going to have to make a gut decision. And I want to be comfortable that when you do make those gut decisions, you're generally going to be right. So anything that you can telegraph to me that like, hey, here's a man who gets it, woman gets it, that's going to make me more comfortable getting into bed with you as a customer or as an investor. Demonstrate commitment. Like I said, it's not enough to say it, show it. build that really ornate brass and marble lobby that tells me that you're here to stay. And that's all I got. We're way over. I apologize. I hope it was worthwhile. I'm going to open up the chat box, take a couple of questions if there are any. And if they're not, I will actually, let me actually do this right now. I'm going to type my direct email address into a chat window. If you have any questions for me that we didn't get to, or if you'd like a copy of the slideshow, please just email me and say, can I get a copy of the American Council's slideshow?
Thank you so much, Andrew, for these very practical steps. And I think this is extremely valuable. We'll be working with each of the startups within our cohort to address a number of the points that you brought up and certainly workshop with them on key points, including the building of the customer lists and reaching out. Several of our startups have good experience in this, so this is all very valuable information that we would like to share with them. I think just finally, and thank you for your time that we went over a little bit, but DreamIt EdTech cohort, talk about next steps and when that will be opening up. I think the goal of our program is to get our international EdTech startups funneled to these accelerator programs. So talk a little bit too, just very briefly, about the value of an accelerator program. And sort of the goals.
Let me start with just overall, don't be shy. Right, so if you want to reach out to me, I gave you my email address for a reason. What I like to hear, and I think most investors or accelerators like to hear when you do your first reach out, is very quick and concise. So, hey, it was really great. Recap where we met. It was really great. I liked your presentation. My startup does. You have 2 sentences for that. Really crisp. You can use that positioning statement that we used kind of in the 4th or 5th slide. If you want to attach a 1-pager, that's good. If you attach like a 30-page deck, I probably won't read it. And then be very, very specific. I'd love to set up a time for us to talk, or I'd like to know when your cohort is, or I'm looking for customers that need X, Y, and Z. Whatever the case may be, also just be very explicit with how I can help you. And I'm happy to help you, whether or not you're a fit for our cohort, whether or not you're ready for our program. I'm just happy to help. So that opens the question. So what exactly is DreamIt? What do we do? What do we look for? So thank you for reminding me. I didn't want to turn this into an ad for DreamIt from the get-go, but I guess I should cover that. So number one, we're the 3rd oldest accelerator in the world. There was Y Combinator, there was Techstars, and then there was DreamIt. We've worked with about 300 companies since our founding in 2008. At first, we were a generalist program, so we worked with all different industries. Some of the bigger companies that you may have heard of, SeatGeek, House Party, which used to be Meerkat, Adaptly if you're in the EdTech space, the AdTech space, Level Up. But then at some point about a year and a half ago, actually I take that back, in 2013, we opened up our DreamIt Health cohort. So it was vertically focused, only digital health companies. We had experimented actually with an EdTech cohort back in 2010 to 2013. It was a group within the general program. But then starting in November of 2015, we rolled out a full 8 to 12 company EdTech cohort, and it's only EdTech. And what we consider EdTech is everything from K-12 to higher ed to corporate learning. We will even consider pre-K, though that's a little like daycare type stuff. That's a little bit of a stretch for us. But we're very broad, right? So like there's that school dismissal app that I talked about briefly. That doesn't have anything to do with learning, but it is a problem that our customers, that our clients have. So that counts as EdTech for us. We have a study abroad apartments. That's one of our companies. It's about US students who want to go to countries in Europe for a semester, either to study or as an intern, and they need places to stay, right? It has nothing to do with pedagogy, but it is a problem for higher ed institutions. So all those things count as EdTech, as well as really hardcore, this is a better way to learn math, or this is a business intelligence tool so that you know who's struggling and where. Those are the types of companies we look for. In terms of stage, we're a little different than we used to be. We used to be kind of that traditional early stage. You come in, sit with us for 4 months. We'll put you up on stage at the end of the program. You'll have demo day, and we'll try to get you an angel round. We'll raise 500,000 to $1.5 million. That program, that type of program, basically was pioneered by us in Techstars. Y Combinator always had a different type of program. But the program that I just described, which is in probably the vast majority of the accelerators out there are now doing that kind of program. That was something that we pioneered, and it's not what we do anymore. So there were a couple of reasons why we made that change. So number one, we had our customers coming to us, our clients, school districts, higher ed universities, corporate players in the space like Blackboard or Cengage, and they were saying, listen, that's a really cool company. It's a really great pain point that they're trying to solve. I love the founders, but they're just a little bit too early to work with corporate. We're going to probably track them for 6 to 12 months, and then we'll engage. So that was incredibly frustrating, both to us and to our startups. But that's just how it is in the startup world, or so we thought. At the same time, we had later stage companies coming to us and saying, I really want to be a part of this customer network. But I got 10 people in my company. I can't come to New York or to Philadelphia or wherever your session is. I can't do that for 4 months and put everything else on hold. And by the way, that offer, the standard accelerator offer of $25,000, $50,000, or $100,000 in exchange for 4 to 10% of your company. I have $1 million in the bank from a seed round I just raised. I don't need the money. I certainly don't want to give up that equity. What can they do for me? And the answer is we really couldn't do anything for them because we didn't want to negotiate the offers deal by deal. Somewhere about a year and a half ago, we realized, wait, we don't actually need that initial investment. If we have companies that are later stage and more mature, our ability to invest in their next round is far more valuable to us as a VC fund than that first $50,000 would be. So now our offer is different, and it's geared entirely around companies that have good initial traction, good initial customer bases, if they're B2B, decent revenue, and getting them to that A round. So number one, we don't give you money. You don't need it, generally speaking. But more importantly, we don't take equity up front. So the main thing that we get from a startup that comes to our program is the right to invest about $500,000 in your next round at a slight discount to whoever leads it. So if you are a typical, at least in the States, post-seed company that's looking to raise an A round, you might raise something like $5 million. The pre-money valuation might be $15 million, which means the post-money is $20 million. Right? We would have the right to invest $500,000 in that round. And if the pre-money was $15 million, Dreamit would be able to get in at $12 million, right? That 20% discount. So that's how we work. And that's actually, it works very well with the market. Like the later stage startups that we want respond to it. So we have guys like LearnMetrics out of Chicago, the business intelligence tool. They came into the program with close to $4 million in annual recurring revenue. They're raising an $8 million A round right now, and it's a hot round. Companies like Empower Financing, who lend to foreign students who have no FICO score in the US, they closed their A round. It was oversubscribed. Instead of $4 million, they ended up raising $6 million. They closed that mid-cycle, and now they're raising a $150 million line of credit, a credit facility, so they can actually finance some of those loans. So we're getting much, much more mature startups than we used to, much, much more mature than the typical accelerator program. And that's actually one of the reasons it's extremely useful for foreign startups. In many cases, the foreign startups have significant traction in their home market. They've got something that works. They've got a good team in place. Now they're looking to figure out if they can get to the US. When I put a company in front of a customer, I can say, hey, this is not two guys with a cocktail napkin. They're used to dealing with customers. They've got a lot of them. They got revenue. They're ready to partner with you right now. What's more, good chunks of our program are remote, right? So if you're a larger company, like Julian, he's got 17 people in Chicago, right? he can't move his entire team to New York. So most of our interaction, our weekly meetings are via Zoom. We have 2 tentpole events. We have 2 or 3 weeks of customer immersions. That's when we bring you into the schools, the districts, the Blackboards of the world, the Cengages of the world, and you present and fast track a possible sale. And then we have the investor roadshow at the end. Just to give you one data point, Chalk.com, company went through the last program. We brought them into Blackboard. They presented 14 weeks later, just a few weeks ago, they signed a $1.7 million deal with Blackboard. Right? This is something that would have taken them 6 to 12 months if they could have ever gotten on their own. And we got that deal signed in 14 weeks. And just very quickly, the last piece of it, the Investor Roadshow, we don't do demo day anymore. If you're raising $1 million, you can do that in $50,000 increments. That's fine. Not that many. It's 20 investors, worst case scenario. If you're raising a $5 million round, it's brutally painful to deal with angels. So instead, we take our startups into the venture capitalist's office. We spend 1 week on the West Coast, 1 week on the East Coast, preceded by emails where we reach out to them, hey, we're coming to San Francisco. Here are the teams. Here's who we think you're interested in. Who would you like to meet with? And that's how this works. So I am way, way, way over. The only other thing I would say is the next EdTech cohort we're likely to run will be in the fall, probably starting around September 1st, which means that our decisions for that are no later than a month earlier than that. So they don't tell me, that would be August 1st. And we'll probably open applications for that somewhere around June 1st, maybe a little earlier. But don't be shy, right? If you're interested, reach out to me earlier. Even if you are pre-seed and you're not ready stage-wise, it's still good for you to reach out to me. I'm happy to help along the way. And eventually I hope you will be ready. Okay, that's all I got.
Andrew, thank you so much for your time, and this is all extremely valuable information. We'll be working with our guys moving forward, and all of this is valuable information. So thank you all for attending today, and thank you again to Andrew Ackerman of DreamIt. So thank you all, and have a great day, everyone. And stay warm, Andrew, in New York, and put on your snowshoes because it's, 10 inches of snow or something?
It may get that high, but it's not there yet. Yeah, I know a lot of you guys are from countries you're like, 10 inches.
Right.
But for us, it's kind of a big deal.
All right. Well, thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye all.